Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Evelina Kozok. I'm Practice Support and Development Team Program Officer, and I would like to invite you for tonight's webinar. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of and sovereign people of the land across which we work. I recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and pay respect to elders past and present. I'd also extend the respect to any Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining us tonight. I am glad to have you here, and I think most of you already watched the first webinar, which we pre-recorded. So most of you knows that our speaker, Margaret Jennings, have had some health issues in the past. And because of that, we unfortunately had to pre-record those events as well. So I am live, but we will be watching recording of Margaret Jennings' reprocessing in general practice. It will not change anything for our viewers today because we will still keep question and answer box open. You can put your question and answers there. We will respond to all questions and answers in the email after the webinar. Also, the most important thing, you will have the certificates at the end, like after a normal live event. The only issue is that I will not be able to ask questions during the session. We will answer for them later. For as I'm talking about evaluations, remember that to get certificate, you will need to fill one out during the next one day. I will talk about it at the end as well. And if you will have any questions during our recording, a question and answer box is on the bottom of the screen. Chat is disabled, but you can put any question in there. I would like also encourage all the practices who are in Eastern Suburbs to attend Thursday webinar. It will be about Medicare Urgent Care Clinic in Maroubra, and it will explain referral pathways and referring to this clinic. We have also other upcoming events. Have a look at that one at the 3rd of August, childhood vaccination schedule update. We still have some places, not many, but we still have some in the restaurant. So if one would like to have it as a team activity and you would like to go together with your nurses and doctors together, we invite you to the nice dinner and information session. If you have registrars in your practice or struggling to get registrars, we will ask you to fill up the workforce planning survey. The survey will close on the 30th of July. I will at the end also put the QR code, which you can scan to fill this short and anonymous survey, which will help us to build evidence and kind of think about our future registrars working with GP practices. And now I would like to close the housekeeping and introduce Margaret Jennings, microbiologist and leading educator on infection prevention control in primary health. As I said before, this is pre-recorded. You will be seeing Margaret, and but it will be like a live session, so you will receive the certificates if you will watch the full session. Thank you very much. Let's start.
Welcome, everybody. I'm really hoping that everybody who's watching tonight's session has, in fact, watched the prelude, if you like, and that was really about making some decisions and how to assess whether we should continue to reprocess our reusable instruments or whether we would be much better off going over to disposables, or if we are attached to a bigger clinic or a large skin clinic, whether we might get them to reprocess. So hopefully everybody has already watched part one. We'll call it part one. That was a fireside chat. That was our fireside chat. Tonight we've got some objectives, and just in case you're not sure, these are: we're going to review safety. I'm not actually going to take you through showing you the process because so many of you already do it and you want some of the finer points. So I won't be teaching you, the basics. But I do want to focus on a review of safety and then introduce why the washer disinfector might be a preferred means of washing, and that has got to do with your safety. In part one, or the prelude, you would have seen that I spoke about that we don't have a firm statement on whether the washer disinfector will be mandatory. So at this point, June, July, August of 2023, let's work towards improving what's in front of us. So whether you go on to process using a wash disinfector or abandon, but you're wanting some time, we're buying some time tonight, and we're going to improve what it is we're doing with an eye on safety, and also with what do we do when the item gets to the reprocessing area. There's just so many things that people say, I could do this, I could do that, but let's just sort that out. And then thirdly, even rearranging the reprocessing area so that it's easy for me to clean. I really do need to clean, and that means the splashback, a metre out. I need to clean every time if I am manually cleaning and rinsing, I've got to clean that area out after every session. To avoid contamination, especially where people have put boxes of gloves or paper towel or hand wash, all those things just become contaminated. So I want to address those three things: the safety, when the item reaches the reprocessing area, and arranging the processing area. And if we can get those things really tick, 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 then we can buy some time. I will talk about the use of an ultrasonic cleaner tonight. That's what we call a pre-clean stage. So it doesn't take the place of cleaning. So if you're using an ultrasonic cleaner, you would then go on to scrub and rinse the instruments generally. If you have bought or about to buy a washer disinfector, then some of those actually have an ultrasonic stage in them. So when you're buying one, you can either have a benchtop one. I don't know if the benchtop ones have got the ultrasonic phase in them. And the washer disinfector has got its name because it washes and it disinfects through heat. So it actually has a temperature control on it, or they can be under the bench. But I think a lot of the ones for general practice are actually on top of the bench. So tonight I'm making that assumption that you have decided to go ahead and really embrace an improvement to your current system, and which, would involve in the future, and we don't know when because we don't know if they're going to make it mandatory, but buying some time ahead of thinking, am I going to be buying a washer disinfector, continue doing instruments? So let's actually have a look at the safety part first, and this is what I want to draw your attention to. And it's really about what happens at the point of use of the instrument. I know I should call them reprocessable devices, but right now I'm saying instrument. So the instrument generally is taken to another room. We do not process in the treatment area. I discussed that in the previous part, so you would have read that and understood why. So we are now going to transfer the item from the treatment area to the reprocessing area, and it needs to be done safely. And in fact, the first step we do is to remove any disposable sharps, obviously, dispose of those, and any item that we're taking for reprocessing needs to be, wiped. Look, you can rinse, but then you're going to have to put everything on to rinse that. And so it's much easier, I think, to wipe the item and pop it into a container. That's, in fact, a requirement, to pop it into a lidded container, items, and take them to the reprocessing area. Now, it may be that you're doing a number of procedures back to back, and so as long as each item is wiped after use, we're not going to get too much adherent material. There is a time when you're going to have to wash the instruments, and we don't leave it till the end of the day. It's still acceptable to put the items, if there's a delay on cleaning, you're anticipating cleaning after maybe every third procedure or something like that, you know, if you're doing a morning and you can get 3 in and then do some cleaning, there would be an anticipation that we're not leaving the instruments dry for hours and hours and hours, that we would attempt to go straight from wiping them to popping them either into an ultrasonic cleaner or scrubbing them. But that doesn't have to occur immediately. It might be an hour before you actually get those 3 sets of instruments and then wash them, and they may be dry in that time. Or there is an alternative. I particularly don't like it, but it is acceptable at present to put them into some detergent in the reprocessing area if there is a delay. But what you work towards is really improving this notion of this item needs to go through to cleaning soon. And that's about resources, staff time, but probably, I think more importantly, it is about seeing why I should be washing the instrument reasonably soon, you know, an hour or so after I've actually used it. Given that I've wiped off the visible soil, what am I going to do? Am I going to pop it straight into the ultrasonic cleaner? Am I going to wait till I've got, say, 3 in the next hour, you know, 3 procedures, and wash them all together? But what I don't do is just let them sit around till lunchtime, dry, or even thinking I can pop them into detergent and leave them for a few hours. We've really got to change our thinking and say, how soon after this instrument is used is it actually going to be now processed? This is a big change, I think, for practices, and that means having staff and staff who know what they're doing. Yes, they need to be trained. The person who has already got some sort of training, either on the spot or preferably with a certificate, and I know that can be difficult for general practice, but you do need to have somebody who's been trained to oversee and teach another person that particular part of it. So they're the things to think about. The resources are, you know, geared around people and time. So it's not as though we forget, oh, well, I'm doing, you know, 4 procedures this morning and I'll worry about the instruments later. No, I need to build into those 4 procedures, maybe after the second one, some scrubbing time, or it's only going to be an hour. Would it be okay to leave them? And that's not a disaster. But it's not a case of I just squeeze it in when I've got a moment. I've really got to, just as you book your patients, you need to book some time to do the processing, and it does need to be done by somebody who knows how to wear the PPE and somebody who knows how to manually clean, or if you have an ultrasonic cleaner and then scrub, somebody who knows how to use that. So you can see that for a tiny practice, the option would be, if I'm only using 1 or 2 instruments a day, would I be better off being fully disposable? And that I covered well and truly in the first part of this. So the safety, when I am wiping the item onto a bit of, and it can be onto paper towel, there's no problem there, or a wipe, I just do it with one hand. I don't pick up a sharp item and wipe it like that. That actually exposes me to well, risk of injury, etc. So the item's wiped, popped into the container. Why do I wipe it first before I put it into the container? And again, I'm just reducing risk. If anything happens to this container of sharp items for reprocessing on the way to the reprocessing area, if something happens and they spill or drop and the thing opens, at least those items have been wiped should they cause an injury. I think you can see we're engineering down that risk. So as I said, it might be that you do 2 or 3 procedures, everything's wiped, goes into the container, and at the end of 2 or 3 procedures, everything's taken into the processing area and dealt with. So I think a good policy is one that addresses exactly what we're not going to put up with. And that is, we are going to do the instruments, you know, within a particular amount of time of them being used. And I think that will stand you in good stead. Now, so transferring the item, again, we have a lidded container, so not just an open one. And again, that's reducing risk, the risk of it upending and breaking. The second aspect was, well, what happens in the reprocessing area? What sort of little changes or updates can I make, given that I've addressed safety in that immediate part? One thing I didn't say about that immediate part is it's the person who uses the items who really ought be wiping them and putting them into the container to be taken away. I think once it's left to other people and the person walks off, we have the risk of blades not being removed. We have the risk of items being covered with gauze, and an unsuspecting colleague comes along and gets an injury. So I think a good policy, and of course, it's mandated, the person who uses the sharp, the disposable sharp, is responsible for its disposal. And if, of course, you're using disposable instruments, what you would, and some of you use a mix, what you would have is an adequately sized sharps container right there so that the sharp is disposed at point of use. Sharp items for disposal are just never left out. So for some of you, that's already a review of procedure. Now, I mentioned just in sort of broad outline, when the item gets to the reprocessing area, here I've got my locked plastic container with half a dozen or more instruments in it. They've been wiped cleanish, not to within an inch of their lives, but, the gross visible soil is removed. They arrive. How have I set up the instrument reprocessing area so that I can commence the process? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, but you have a washer disinfector. So I will make a statement that there ought to be 2 sinks. There really ought to be 2 sinks. We've moved on from trying to have bowls, et cetera. So what I would do is I would say, right, I need to spend 10 minutes in between my, the 2 procedures I've just done, and I've got another 2. I need to do these 2. I don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, but I do have a washer disinfector. So I might put everything on and I might just rinse them and then put them in the washer disinfector. And you might say, well, should I turn it on for just 6 or 7 instruments? Would I be better off waiting? These are the decisions to make. If you've got an ultrasonic cleaner, you would put them through straight away. You would put the 6 items or the 10 items through. When you get your washer disinfectors, eventually, you will see how many instruments you can load in. But I think it's a bit wasteful to put the machine on for 4 or 5 instruments. I think you'd need a few more. These are the things to work out, but the instruments really can't be left wet, you know what I mean, waiting for another process. You've really got to start the process and see it through. So option 1 is I don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, I don't have a washer disinfector, I've just got me. And so that is, I'm still bound to look after these instruments, not leave them dry for too long, but I've come in and I've put my safety gear on. Maybe a face shield would be adequate, I think now. Everybody can use those better than masks and goggles. So a face shield, a plastic apron, and my thick gloves. And so I've got the instruments. I'm going to give them a rinse. Then I'm going to clean the sink back. Always start with a clean, dry sink. I'm now going to put my detergent in with my warm water, and I've got my scrubbing brushes that have just, either been through the steriliser or hot rinsed, dried, and I'm now going to take each item and scrub it under the level of the water. I'm then going to rinse it in my rinsing sink under warm to hot running water, and I'm going to put it onto what is a container with a rack or something like that, and I'm going to be drying them. Now, when I'm putting them onto that side, I'm going to dry them, I should have them in a container with a lid, because now I'm going to, if I just leave them bare and open, I'm now going to scrub and rinse the next item. So all the contamination is going to go over the instrument that I just cleaned. So, I'm a big fan of those celery containers with the rack in. So I rinse them, scrub, rinse, pop them in there, pop the lid on, do the next one. You can do that. So you've got to visualise when you're scrubbing the instruments or rinsing them that you're having splash, as mentioned, going out about 1 metre. That means that when I've done all my instruments and I've cleaned myself out of everything and wiped my apron, my shield, done my hands, I can dry the instruments using a different set of thick gloves, vinyl gloves, and with a low lint or lint-free towel. I've now got this contaminated area around me. So what a lot of people do is, in fact, before they dry the instruments, they clean the splashback. So you can imagine if you've got shelves right there, they're just going to be splashed all the time. So you say to yourself, I need a setup that is easily cleaned after each washing process. And so this might be 4 or 5 times a day even. And so that's why we don't have things stored just above our heads. We don't have things sitting there. We don't have gloves. We don't do hand washing at any of those reprocessing sinks. So we're using a dedicated area. It's not shared with anything. We don't bring the waste in there. We don't bring the linen or the linen skips in there. We don't put cardboard boxes in there. This is just a room for instruments, an area, if you like, an area for instruments. Nothing else is used. Yes.
Instead of dirty sink, can I have the container?
I think we've really got to move along, whereas we may have found that acceptable while we were trying to work out how we would modify or proceed with instrument processing. It's really expected that you would have 2 sinks and you wouldn't use either of them for washing your hands. Just as it says in the current guidelines online, it says you need a dedicated area, a separate area that's not shared with hand washing or treatment or admin or anything. So there's a real jump. Now, these things have actually not changed so much, but we're bringing them to the fore. We've understood how difficult it is for practices to even get the procedure right. Now we're focusing on the environment of that process.
Another question. So if the sterilization is happening in the treatment room after hours, so during the day we're using it as a treatment room, but after hours it's like a sterilization room, instrument processing room. Is it okay or not?
Well, that would be what I would call an interim measure while I'm really working out, because I can't leave the washing till the end of the day. So I'm going to have to be washing during the day. And, we need to accept that this is a really important job to reprocess instruments. And so that's why it's expected that you have a separate dedicated area. So myself, I can't see now these days, I might have 15 years ago, but I can't see today that I can use my treatment room for instrument reprocessing. And I think whilst we still will continue to do that until we receive, the absolute you must stop, we need to be thinking, how is this going to play out? How am I going to plan for my next stage? But I think if anybody thought that they could just, close at 5 o'clock and do all of their washing and sterilising in a treatment area, I don't think that would really be acceptable. There's going to be too much crossover of surfaces and there'll be a fair bit of contamination. I mean, as it is, you even need to keep the steriliser a fair way away from the washing and the scrubbing. The instrument in a hospital, CSSD, they actually have a separate room where the washer disinfector passes the cleaned instruments through to a clean room. Now, we don't have that, but we can certainly get space in a long, long, long galley where the steriliser is a fair way away from the actual washing, at least, 3-4 metres, something like that. So these are the constraints, but considerations. And I'm really not, I'm not ashamed to sort of say we need to keep pushing on and improving. Always ask that question. The surgery that I do in general practice, it's surgery. People might want to consider that it's not heart-lung transplant, but the risk of infection is there and all instruments are in fact treated the same. So hopefully that's answered the question that we really do need to think about the setup that we're going to have, and it isn't just a case any longer of saying, I think I'll just keep going. I seem to be okay. I've managed with a bowl and a sink. We're really moving along. Now, sure, you might manage with a bowl and a sink today, but that shouldn't be your plan to be like that in 6 to 12 months' time. It really does need to be pushed along. So hopefully I've answered that as best I can. So here I am with my first option, which is I don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, I don't have a washing disinfector, I have me. That was one option. The other option is, oh, look, I think I can run out and buy an ultrasonic cleaner. I can't get my mind around a washer disinfector. Is it worth me buying an ultrasonic cleaner? Well, I can tell you that it is superior to just manual cleaning. And you would do it first. So as soon as the instruments come in from being used and wiped, they would go into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, they need to look relatively clean. Yes, you can rinse them. You're going to have to put everything on. But if they look completely clean, they go into the ultrasonic cleaner. It is made fresh, the solution, each day. There's a fresh solution of detergent, carefully measured. There is some degassing. There's a degassing required. And there's also a cycle to see if it's actually working, removing soil from items. So there are those considerations. So you come in each morning and the ultrasonic cleaner will be dry. It will have been drained from the night before. Now, if we're putting in dirty looking items into the ultrasonic cleaner, thinking, oh, I'm not going to wipe that, what happens is the water becomes cloudy. And, the rule is as soon as the water becomes cloudy during the day, you've got to change it. So it's much better. I mean, you've got to change it at the end of the day. You've got to empty it all out. But if you are putting items that look relatively clean in there, you're not getting a lot of visible muck coming off into the solution. You can see it, if you put a dirty item in there. So it's not appropriate to have things floating around or a cloudy solution and put another load in. No. So with the ultrasonic cleaner, what it's really good at doing is using its little implosion bubbles. It, I guess, it vibrates the muck off the item, the soil off the item. But what can happen is if you don't pay attention, you would end up and, let's say you went back in an hour after the ultrasonic cleaner was turned on, and usually the cycles, I'm not going to specify, but somewhere around 15 minutes or whatever. But what can happen is if you go in an hour later, all the dirt that was suspended, that came off and was shattered, actually now settles back on the instrument. So what we say is know how long that cycle is and lift the basket out, and now the instruments can be rinsed and you can start the actual scrubbing process. Now, there's a safety aspect here. It is much safer to manually clean ultrasonically pre-cleaned items than grab an item straight away and start cleaning it, from the patient, even after a wipe. So sometimes I'll go into a practice and I'll see that the ultrasonic cleaning is done after the scrubbing. No, it's done first. Okay, it's done first. So think about what your setup would look like in that case. You might say, do I have to have an ultrasonic cleaner if I've got a washer disinfector? Well, if you've already bought the ultrasonic cleaner, you're probably going to buy the washer disinfector in the future. And it may be that more and more of the washer disinfectors will have an ultrasonic phase in the start. The little ones, you might be able to buy one now. I can't confirm that. But it is not a bad step to do to get an ultrasonic cleaner now, or if you're not sure about what step you're going to take. It would definitely improve the outcome of the cleaning of the instrument. But I think you can see what we want to do is get away from manual cleaning full stop and just put the items, straight into the washer disinfector. So that was one option. That was option 2. I have an ultrasonic cleaner and I manually clean and dry. So that's option 2. Option 3 is I'm really going to embrace this update and I'm going to run out and buy a washer disinfector. What do I do? What do I get? And so the answer is you need to look at them. Don't buy until you can work out what your workload is. The cycles are about 35 to 45 minutes and they are plumbed, so they will use water from your own supply and they will dry. Now, I spoke to a clinic recently and I said, so the items must come out dry. Oh, well, not always. I said, sorry, you've paid thousands for an item and it must come out dry. So, you know, go back and see whether we need to improve our loading or our time isn't right or something like that. So that's what people love about the washer disinfectors. The item comes out dry. So it means you've eliminated that bit of handling as well. So think about the space you would need. You would need a setting down area. If you're going to have an ultrasonic cleaner, space for that. And then my sinks for manual scrubbing. And if I do get an washer disinfector, the items, yes, can go straight in there. However, not every item, not every instrument, I think in general practice we're okay, but not every instrument can go into a washer disinfector. So if you're working in other areas or have more sort of tricky instruments, I'm thinking of scopes, things like that, the washer disinfector may not be appropriate. It might not be appropriate because of the pH of the detergent that's used. It might not be appropriate because of temperature, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're pretty okay in general practice that most of our instruments can go through there. So I don't like to describe it as a dishwasher, but I think you get the idea. if I do say that, but don't go out and get a dishwasher. That is certainly not what it's about. So what does my washer disinfector do that I can't do when I do my own manual washing? It controls the dosing of the detergent, so it's super accurate. It controls time. So imagine we are scrubbing instruments. We probably don't scrub them all for the same number of seconds. It does a much better job of cleaning, can I say that? And it accesses, can get into all surfaces. So temperature, time, detergent, ability to clean, and you can actually test its cleaning ability with a little soil load test, a little protein test, which you put into the device. I'm not sure whether it's daily, but there is a test there. So this is what we call a validated process. Validated means I can confirm and prove that I am cleaning the instrument that I'm putting in there by all of those things being equal. Whereas when you and I manually clean, we might scrub for 3 seconds, we might not scrub all surfaces, we might have hot water, we might have warm water, we might have tepid water. So this is all controlled. And that's the fact that I'm not handling the used item, huge safety improvement. And so that is what you would be looking for and why we're going over to that. I think I mentioned in the previous session that each of the professions have been given a certain amount of time to get on board with mechanical cleaning. So for the hospitals, it's all mechanical cleaning apart from those items that have got to be manually cleaned or go through a different cleaning process. Then the day procedure centres, the dentist, I think there's a time limit there. And so general practice has come in at this point. I did mention in the previous session, but just a reminder that, I've just lost my train of thought there. And it was just to do with you can compare costs. That's right. There's in section 10 in the current updated RACGP guidelines, there is a part that shows you would I be better off disposable or better off reprocessable. But in the end, it's about your throughput. It's definitely cheaper to be reprocessing if you've got throughput. If you're doing 3 or 4 or 5 loads a day through the steriliser, definitely you would maintain that. If you're putting through 2 or 3 loads a week, you might rationalise and say, would I be better off using disposables or knocking on the door of the skin clinic down the road? So they're some of the things that I wanted to cover. So for those of you thinking of your current situation and saying, well, look, I have 2 sinks, that's great, but they seem to be shared with hand washing in the surgery, we've really got to move on. But how could I improve that right now, knowing that I'm not going to get a new room for all of this tomorrow? And the answer is to keep everything perfectly clean and dry. I think somebody referred to just before about containing the washing sessions. So if I've got my patients booked in, make sure I've got a space in there somewhere in the middle of a morning session for me to be able to wash my instruments and then clean everything right back, dry them, and then leave them in a container until I've got enough for a load, maybe to do at lunchtime. So at least not have the two processes happening, or I'm in the middle of washing and the patients come in. No. Same with sterilisation. I'm only going to put the steriliser on when there are no patients there, when there's nobody in that room. Because of dust, foot traffic is bad news when I have got the steriliser being opened and the items being removed, really bad news. So safety also, when the instruments, when we think of other aspects of safety, I'm thinking about when the items come out dry out of the wash disinfector, make sure obviously that you're not going to burn yourself, read the instructions there, and there may even be a time when they can say they're cool, they can be released. They'll be different on each of them. And when you are putting the instruments, when you're loading your instruments into their pouches, into their flexible wrap, sealing and labelling, there would be an issue, and this is about avoiding mix-ups. Make sure you're actually going to sterilise at that point. Don't sort of pre-wrap with an idea of I'll put the steriliser on when I've filled it up in an hour. Just load, or just wrap, label, seal and load, and then press that button. No gap. So what we're saying there is that there could be a risk that if somebody sees some instruments in a steriliser, they think that they're done. And here's you just wanting to load them up until you've got a full thing. So we never do that. That's more a safety issue on the side of the patient.
Which side up to put packet into the machine?
Okay, well, there are a couple of choices, and the dentists are quite different to the general practice, but generally we have what we call we'll call it a toast rack. It is not a toast rack, but we have a rack and we put our items in side on, the pouches go in side on like that, like toast. If you have it flat, if you have the flexible packaging, the pouches flat, it's always paper to the tray, paper to the tray, not plastic to the tray. Now, the manufacturer might say that you can do that, but we know that wet packs are more likely to result if you've got almost like a little cup, with the plastic against the tray. It can retain moisture and you end up with wet packs. So it's paper against the pouch. So it's not unreasonable if you've got 8 pouches and you've got 4 trays that go in the steriliser, you might go 2, 2, 2, 2. You might do that. Or you might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the one. It's going to depend on the size of your steriliser. What you don't do is have overlapping. It's got to be single layer, and don't cover all the holes. You know how it's a perforated tray or rack, if you like, but let's call it a tray. It's perforated, but don't cover all the holes up. General practice tends to have the 6, 7, 8 pouches. So does that answer that question? Yep, okay. One other thing that's a little bit to do with safety, and that's about cleaning the area after each washing session. And honestly, paper towel and a made-up detergent are fine. I wouldn't use wipes. It's expensive. You'd go through a fair few wipes and they're 4 or 5 cents each. But I would just have made up my Sonidet, Clinidet, ViraClean, whatever you like, but just a simple detergent like a whatever you're using for your ultrasonic cleaner or your instruments, make that up, but don't use a spray bottle. So we're not using spray bottles because there are issues associated with contamination. So just have a pour bottle or a squeeze bottle, you know, the one where the little tap comes up and you can squirt, paper towel. And so you would do all of your splashback, all of your benches, your sinks. And the sinks need to be left dry. They need to be dried out, taps, etc., all of your PPE. So paper towel and detergent is fine for all that. As I said, I wouldn't use wipes. I think that that's too expensive. So hopefully that's helped there. People will say, why do I have to dry the sink? Well, we know that, first of all, it just becomes highly contaminated. But then the next person who may in fact be wanting to use the sink for something else, even though we are saying that's not the future, but right now that might be happening. We need to leave it clean, because if we've got any water pooling, it just becomes contaminated. They then put the water on, splashes back at their face, and they were just there to hand wash. One thing that I would do probably straight away is I would really discourage, where you've got a shared area currently, and of course you're not going to in the future, but where you currently have an area where people will do their hands, move them straight onto alcohol-based hand rub and just say, you know what, there's no hand washing at this sink. This is for instruments, and this is one way we can keep people away from that sink. You can even get a special alcohol that you can use on your hands for surgery. It's not the one that we normally see, not the normal ones. It's specially for surgery. However, you do need to have washed your hands in normal liquid soap first. Well, that can be done at another sink in maybe a consult room. Then you can come in and you can apply this special alcohol. It usually requires 3 applications. A lot of the surgeons love it because it doesn't have the drying and skin damaging effects of a chlorhexidine 4%. So this is quite a different sort of an alcohol. But that would mean then that I'm not having to share those sinks. So that would even be an improvement. Keeping everything clean and dry is an improvement. I think we're probably going to go past the idea of putting not stickers, plastic laminated signs everywhere. I think those days are going. Unless you're prepared to wipe them over every time, they just become contaminated and highly contaminated. And so you might say, but nobody's touching the wall, but people are touching the benches. So we just have a process for cleaning the area. We don't hang our goggles there or our gloves there because they will definitely become contaminated all the time. So the room or that area looks really bare. Under the sink, I might put my detergent, paper towel, PPE, things like that, or a back wall. I might hang my mask, but, more than a metre away from where I've got activities happening there. What else did I wanted to just mention a little bit about records. We were going to do that. So this would be recording even the results, the daily results of my ultrasonic cleaner. I've got to record that I tested that every day. If I'm using the washer disinfector, I do a test on that. That might be the soil load test. I record that. And this won't be news to you because you're already recording results from your steriliser. To that, you would add how often am I cleaning and wiping over the steriliser, recording that. But certainly in your logbook that you enter, you'd be recording a description of the load, what the pouches contained, how many of each there were, and you would also be doing tracking, which has now almost become synonymous with tracing, that you would be saying, who did I use in this particular load, which patients were done in this, which instruments were used on which patients from that load. So some people will actually number each pouch. That's probably not what you really need to do, but you just want to know which load did my patients who've had procedures come from? What was the date and the cycle number of processing, so that I can link my patient to the load that they came from. And if there is any issue, and occasionally there are, where, whoops, somebody's pressed a cycle that should never have been pressed, it happens. I know from the calls I get, it happens. What do? I've somehow, for some reason, pressed a cycle that wasn't validated. So you can only use the cycle that you validated, which tends to be that common one that caters for, the trickiest things that you're putting in. So you've covered yourself there, but sometimes somebody comes along and presses another button and says, oh, we can just use a short cycle. I'm only putting a couple of things in, but we haven't validated for that. So now we've got to confirm that that cycle is okay to use, or else call the patients and say, we're not sure whether the things we've put through actually worked on you. Much better to get that cycle validated, get it done literally within a couple of days, and do the biological tests. And obviously, if everything works, we don't have to then go and hassle the patients and say, we're not sure what we used on you. But it's a real heart-stopping moment, I can tell you. And I did get a call recently about this, and happily, nothing grew in the little vials, that we use for the validation. But it's a sobering moment, I'll say that. Obviously, you keep your records of the steriliser technician having been and helped you with your validation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending tonight. I still would like to mention things. So first of all, don't forget that you will receive your certificates if you will fill up evaluation form. Evaluation form, just the link to that was posted in the chat, as well as it will be sent to you tomorrow. So please fill up evaluation form. Second thing important is that practices often ask me about the grant money. So to connect it to this webinar, I wanted to say that we can use some of the grant money to improve our infection prevention control. So if you would need to do some partitions to separate the sterilizing room, or if you would like to do any innovation in this area, it's okay. However, buying disposable instruments is not, because it's a business as usual, so it is not covered by the grant money. But definitely coming from sterilizing to disposable or improving your sterilizing processes, definitely it could be covered by the grant money. I wanted to mention also the new guidelines for infection control prevention were released in November 2022. I will also include the link to them in the email, which will forward this presentation. And all the questions, I think we have about 8 questions, I'm going to present to Margaret Jennings, and when she will give me the answers, you will receive the email with all the answers. So first of all, thank you for tonight. Second, please fill up evaluation form because it's important for us. And just await our email with answers to your questions and some links. Thank you very much. Good night.